Yes, I do like this type of awareness type of meditation. I think we also kind of discussed this on Facebook as well. Um, Up to a certain point, like once we expand outward and then going beyond and then beyond,
Hmm.
it does feel like I'm dropped in middle Pacific Ocean without life vest, and then I don't have a bearing and I'm not sure where I'm going. I'm just kind of like floating out there.
Hmm.
And it's not a scary feeling, but it's more of aimless feeling of
Hmm.
that just kind of. So then once it goes beyond and beyond, I could definitely tell that, what's his name? Mateo
Hmm.
said the same thing. He gets kind of lost. So
Yeah.
should we, I know we're supposed to just let go and things like that, but you know, many of our meditations have either an object or mind. When we try to get those two things dissolved,
Mhm.
it's a transition that we have to go through.
Yeah. 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 So first, I would say it's feeling that space so that the space actually has a felt quality to it. So it's, um, and it, um, as you rest as that space, there you are the whole space. So there's really no one or nowhere to go anywhere or to be disoriented. You are you are the whole space. So as the whole space, there's no individual elements in that space, right? There's nothing that could be floating in it. You are the whole space. There's not a thing, a being that could be aimless because there's no individual sense of boundary that would, of something that would be headed in a direction, right? So as you really get, that's why we use the term rest as awareness, not rest in awareness. Right? If you were
Hmm.
resting in awareness, you could be this little being floating in awareness, right? Right. When you rest as awareness, you're being the whole thing.
Oh, okay. Because in my visualization, I still see a black dot as me or something, or a
Yeah.
consciousness that's
Yeah.
floating around. So
Right.
you're
So
saying
that,
to dissolve that, and
well, so not to try to do anything, but there's a shift that happens. This shift from there's me focusing on that. Okay. Like there's me and then there's awareness and I'm aware of awareness. Okay. There's that. And then there's a shift that happens when I am that space.
mm,
There's
mm,
that is a felt sense of, oh, whatever this is, it's the whole thing.
okay.
Call it awareness, call it being, call it consciousness, call it nothing, whatever you want to call it, it's everything everywhere. And when something is everything at once, it's really no thing.
Mm,
It, there's no
mm.
thing here that can orient itself. It's just this open whole field at once.
What would your suggestion in trying to make that kind of shift? Because it seems like it's coming in and out for
Yeah.
me.
And that's natural, right? That is
Oh, okay.
exactly how it, yeah, how it happens. You kind of, I feel that, now I feel like I'm this, like there's a back and forth that happens as we are learning to acclimate to what that shift is like. Yeah, so there's a glimpse of it where you just feel like, ah, they're just complete stillness, silence, spacious. There's nothing happening. There's no one having any experience. That's why the question is, in a sense, uh, a koan. It's it's there is no one having. the experience. It's who or what, it's, well, awareness itself. It's this whole space. And once you have that shift to resting as that whole space, then all those questions just don't even make sense anymore. They are questions that come from being this, right? And yeah, and it is, right, that this is how it happens. It's like when I had this experience out in Canyonlands, right? It was a moment when I was like, like I had no thought. I couldn't feel me. It felt like it was just awareness, this vast open awareness, and just nothing else. And then, yeah, I popped out of that, right? And literally I came back to the city and I was like, oh, what was that? I don't even know what that was. And so it led me on this journey to, well, what was that? What, so I did, decades of Tai Chi and Qigong and Reiki and Kriya and all these heart math, all these practices, right? It's like, what was that, right? And these practices are all ways of tuning into this body, heart, mind, and then to subtler sensations of energy. And then from there, we have these steps because they're kind of how you said, how do you do it? So you can start with your posture and you feel your feet, you start to awaken sensory awareness. You feel posture points, you feel breath, and you feel energy. That's a little less defined than a body, right? And then once you feel energy, you start to feel these formless objects. You can feel stillness. Oh, stillness has a feeling to it. You can listen to silence. So I can actually hear silence in some strange way. I can start to sense space. Oh, how big a space can I sense? Right. So these are, what about, can I sense a space bigger than that? How about one bigger than that? What about a space that has no boundaries? If there's a space that has no boundaries, it's just one space, then there's no individual beings. There's just vast space, right? And then from there, we come back and we integrate that awareness with this felt sense of being in a body. So the body then is an experience of awareness itself. It's an expression of awareness. So we start to integrate, oh, how can I have that and be this individual at the same time? How does that work? But we start to feel how it works. We start to feel when we come back and we're aware of the space of the body, the space around the body, and then just one space. Oh, there's some way that there's only one, but there's also individual expressions. There's some, and it may not make sense to the mind, but then you can feel it, right? You can get this felt, oh, I can feel like I'm just space and I'm sitting here, both at once.
The non-duality paradox.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but then it's a paradox to the analytical mind, but not to the felt sense. Like you can feel how it works. You can feel, oh, there's this vast infinite space and there's no body. And then, oh, here's a body as an expression of the space. It's like the clouds in the sky. The clouds aren't separate from the sky. They're a part of the sky, right? It's the same. So that's a metaphor for this. So when you're being the cloud, you're not, the sky is still there, right? You're just aware of, oh, I'm this thing floating in the sky, right? And then there's a sense where the cloud kind of vaporizes, and oh, there's just the sky, right? There's no separation between those two. They're just modulations of awareness.
Thank you.
Yeah, Kevin.
Long-winded, but
Yeah, Kevin, can I add to that just a little? Because it's weighing for you and Matteo and everybody else. Because what Kevin said is so accurate. And what you've also pointed to about this modulation of like a pendulum, you know, the attention going in and out. So it really is all about attention and perception. So what actually happens for attention has to be directed towards an object, right? So in a lot of your meditative practices, you're guided towards meditating on an object. So you think about, if I say to all of you listening, you know, can you direct your attention towards the door? Then you can direct your attention towards the door in your room, right? We know where we came in and out, and that's an object. And if I ask you to direct your attention towards the breath, you can do that too, because the breath, we perceive the breath as an object. And that's what tends to happen in the first part of the guidance of the meditation. We start to grab onto stillness, silence, and space as actually objects. So there is a point at which they're still objects. You're in the center of your head. You're, like you said there's a black dot there. So the attention is at that stage still perceiving in meditative awareness that there's an object. Now, then Kevin actually guides you to be aware of the one having the experience. Now, because attention is so hooked into being object derived, we still, even when Kevin starts to guide that, you still look towards. So he says, expand outwards. And so you still, like Matteo was saying, you still go to a point where actually what you're doing up to a certain point, it's still concept. So it's still conceptual. You're going and directing, just like you would towards a door, but on a much more subtle level. You're directing the subtleness of attention towards space itself, and it's going out, and your attention is following it out and out. But when Kevin says to experience awareness as awareness itself, what happens at that point is, to use some familiar terms, that attention turns inwards, right? It kind of looks for who, and Kevin asked that question finally, who is the one that's aware? Now, attention only exists when there's an object, right? And when it turns back towards itself, it's looking for an object still. And what you mentioned goes in and out, this kind of vacillation, this kind of pendulum effect. Because what actually happens at that point is the attention looks inward for it. It can't find it. So it's still a little bit in conceptual awareness at this subtle point. And so it kind of looks out, tries to make the space go out. It's still, then it goes back in and tries to find the source, right? The one that's aware. Now, there is a point at which attention can't find the one that's aware, because of course it's not an object. And the only way that attention survives is when there's an object. So there's a point in meditation when you keep up. This is why Ramana Maharshi said the basic meditation, the ultimate meditation practice is to keep asking who's aware, or who am I? Because when you keep turning inwards like this, the attention at some point actually collapses in and on itself. It no longer can find an object. And that's why a lot of practices like Mahamudra and Dzogchen and so on speak about the unfindable, that the ungraspable or unfindable moment, that the moment you recognize, and it's all about recognition, the moment you recognize that this, who am I, this supposedly subject is actually unfindable, because there's nothing that we know. You can test this out, right, by looking at a thought. A thought arises, abides, and dissolves. It's not permanent. There's no thought that you can keep on and on and on and on, just like you were talking about your thoughtless experiment. The actual question is, can I do the opposite? Take one thought and see if you can keep that one single thought throughout the day. through the whole 24 hours, right? So we know that the thought is not substantial. We know that attention is not going to stay on it forever. That attention's not capable, actually, of doing that. So when it turns back towards the one, because it's so used to finding objects, and it can no longer find it, it collapses. And that's what Kevin arrived at all those years ago, was this natural collapse of attention. At that point, well, there was no longer a he, there was no longer a subject called Kevin. The attention collapsed, and there just was what was originally always there, unchanging, always that unchanging nature of being itself is what's always present when attention collapses in on itself. So when attention has collapsed, and this is that pendulum swing you were talking about, so that's why it's so important just to stay, as Kevin said, just stay with awareness. So you're aware, you turn inwards. I can't find the subject, the one that's aware, because it's unfun, right? The actual one that's aware is infinite, because the one that's aware is aware of everything. And that means by sheer nature that it's boundless. So when the attention turns inwards and collapses, by definition, that is non-conceptual awareness. That's non-dual awareness. Then there's no longer any subject and object, because there's no referral point for attention to dwell on. And that's it then ceases to be. And because it's collapsed in on itself, in fact, what it's done, it's gone to the only one point it can go, which is to source itself. It actually recognizes itself. It recognizes itself as itself. It recognizes awareness as awareness. It's no longer attending to any object. So that sheer collapse of attention inwards on itself, because the nature of awareness is ungraspable and unfindable, is boundless and limitless and unchanging. It's like you directly recognize and experience that quality. You're not experiencing an object. You actually recognize or apprehend or truly recognize that nature, that quality. That's why it's often called nature of mind practice in many of those ancient traditions, because you literally recognize that. So that's what, in a kind of way, Kevin's beautiful story is nature of mind. He recognized it directly in nature. And that's partly why, a lot of those practices, which are big open sky practices or big open boundless, because their sense of nature is actually the closest to, I'd say, falling in love and the sense of nature are those absolute qualities that kind of are just so close to what awareness is really pointing to. I don't know if that helps a little bit, but that's really the nature.
It does. But is it an instant thing that once it collapses, then you'll have it, or do we just keep collapsing it every time so then it becomes like a natural
stable state? Yeah, it can become stable. Yeah, that's our project here, is to try to convey that it can become stable. Yeah, that is the nature of being itself. That is all there is. We just, out of all that is, we just identify with this skin suit and its thoughts and its feelings. And rather than just seeing this as a process of life itself, this here is just life itself spiraling up into a momentary form. Right. So it's not, there's no separation. There's no, and that's on the app this week, we posted the Enlightenment Switch. So that is the switch. It's the switch to resting as awareness itself, rather than being identified with this supposed substantial form here. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, I think your question, just that question about instant or process, you know, in many of those traditions, they describe what's called the waterfall, the river, and the ocean. And what you're talking about, the instantaneous one, is very rare. It can happen, but that's like the ocean, where you suddenly you recognize the ocean immediately. Most people either go for either a waterfall experience where they jump into it and then they lose it completely for years and they're trying to find it somewhere and then they jump into it again. That's like up and down. Or the river, which is really what the whole raising a vibration process, that's a river process where you're literally coming into the river and you're cultivating the sense, knowing that it always returns to the ocean, and you naturally allow the current to move towards the ocean. So there are different ways, but some of them are rare and some of them have lots of hazards to jumping up and down on the water. It's much simpler to be in the current of the river and allow it to flow towards the ocean.
And it's like a safe, natural unfolding of consciousness, right? It's not just like say people use, I don't have experience with this, but people use psychedelics to like be thrown out into that experience, right? Right. And they're like, oh, wow, right? Apparently. But there's no skill, there's no practice, there's no, you have to then, that may, like my Canyonlands experience, it could be like, oh, that's possible. That, like I said, oh, I found out, oh, that's possible. What is that? So it could lead you to then say, oh, how do I practice this? Right? How do I engage with this and unfold this awareness so that the layers of awareness peel away over the time of the practice until I just know so clearly what it is to rest as awareness that none of these forms compel me anymore. You just don't believe them anymore. Like any thought or feeling that arises, you're like, thought, feeling, right? Big deal, right? So it's a thought, it's a feeling. Nothing is compelling. It doesn't mean there's nothing to it. It just means, oh, it's an expression of life in this moment. It's what life is doing in this moment. Let me follow that, see where it goes. But that's not who I am.
Kevin, you know, it's interesting on the discussion of psychedelics, because I mean, just for all company here, it's kind of, and because I know the others will listen to this afterwards, is that I've had a lot of discussion with many people about psychedelics. And just as Kevin says, if you have one experience of it and it launches you there and you don't have a support mechanism or a path, then it becomes it can actually become quite confusing for a personality. So I've always asked people, if they're doing psychedelics, is it their path? Like the shaman who does psychedelics, that is their spiritual path. If you're going to make it your spiritual path, then it's a bit like meditation, then sure. But the West tends to, again, talking about attention, tends to objectify these things. Oh, look what they're doing in the jungle of Peru. Let's go and do the same thing. But then it's not taken as with the heart of that spiritual practice itself. So that's
one lifetime of skillful means.
Exactly.
Right? A lifetime of cultivating that inner knowing and knowing how this works and knowing, okay, now you're going into this and somebody is guiding. It's like a guided meditation, right? It is Stephen says, it's a whole lifetime of practice that this psychedelic is embedded within.
There's always cost to shortcuts.
Yeah.
And in the sense, when you see it like that path isn't a shortcut. When you look at what those the shaman is doing, that's a lifelong dedication of a practice. There is no shortcut about it. It's just like a meditation practice, right? It's when a Westerner goes down there on a trip It's like, oh, I'm going to have this experience. It's going to change my life. That's a whole different thing. It's out of context of that whole rich tradition and skillful practice. So I think, in the West, we tend to look at the psychedelics like that. Oh, it's like taking an aspirin. But now I recognize the oneness of everything, right? It's okay. Then again, it's like a thought in meditation. Okay, so is that going to be just a fleeting moment, like every thought, like every feeling, like every sensation, like every behavior, like this body?
Well, what I meant was the people who's taking it is doing a shortcut, instead of just like when we take caffeine or something like that, it's short and instant right away, right? Versus if we practice qigong or exercise, we sustain that energy throughout our body naturally throughout the whole day, instead of taking Starbucks shots or something, espresso shots. That gives you that instant, but the instant and they don't come back down, it's not sustainable.
Right, exactly. And those experiences are pretty big to have be instantaneous, right? They're can be real shocking and shattering or enlightening or whatever, but it's that momentary. There's not that base of skillful means and natural unfoldment. So Stephen and I are always talking about this body, heart, mind is an intelligent system of awareness, seeking awareness becoming aware of awareness itself. There's a natural unfoldment to that happens in steps and layers and over time of practice. And there's something really important and valuable in that being in time and in process. Good questions. Thank you.
Sorry to take us to a divergent.
Oh, no, that's good. It's wonderful.
Yeah, it was wonderful. I was going to say the same way. It was wonderful.
All right. Anyone else? Yes, Jody.
When I did the reading last week and I did this, it blew my mind. I mean, it blew my mind. I was just like, oh my God, there's a place you can go and that chattery monkey mind shuts up. And I don't know, is it the place? I mean, is that the place like in the brain where it kind of is quiet? Because I've done it a couple times since then and it is always quiet there.
Right.
And I love it. I would stay there. And then I wrote notes. And then the very last thing is who's watching this and I'm like, is that a trick question? And so today when you said awareness I thought, oh my God, for the first time in my life, I've been in awareness because I have this mind that I don't think I'm alone, but it's my mind that just keeps going and going. And it was so brilliant that there's this spot, somewhere like down that is just quiet.
Yes.
That's the silence is beautiful. You don't want to mix it up with anything. And then when I got to the question, I just thought, so I'm a big Michael Singer person. And I just thought, oh, well, he's just, I'm going layer by layer. I wasn't sure what that was. So I'm thrilled to know that it's awareness, that, and I didn't get nervous about the big box. In fact, I love that piece because if you can envelop the whole world in it, then we can all be one and not so angry. That would be lovely. And this has been like one of the most important pieces in the book for me, just to be able to find,
it's kind of a secret spot.
Yeah.
So
it's something I've never heard of before. you know, so it was, I loved it. I love it. And then you do have it on the app. So, you know, I went on the app and did that there, and it was, yeah, it was very calming to my jittery soul.
Nice,
So
nice.
thank you so much for that. Yeah.
So if you think of the center of your brain is your brainstem, right?
Okay.
And then around that you have your limbic brain. And then around that you have your neocortex.
Oh, okay.
Thinking mind. Okay, but the center of the brain is, it's like our most primordial consciousness. It's like just consciousness of being alive, right? It's just this really, I don't want to say primitive, but it's primordial. It's just, there's no thought that's happening there. And it's just connected to this pure sensory awareness. So it's a way of, like, if you're going down into your feet and sensing your feet, that's pure sensory awareness too. If you're sensing your hands or sensing space or that bigger space, that's pure sensory awareness. And that's kind of localized in the center of your brain, although you could say it's distributed through this whole body, heart, mind system, and distributed through consciousness as a whole. But yeah, it is a good place to go to start to become familiar with the sense of just pure awareness.
Yeah, it's the first time I've ever, you know, put that in my consciousness. And you know, it is a really good place to go. When I did it the very first time, I felt so safe, you know, like, and no, I'm an emotive person, so I'm emotions all the time. And so none of that was going on. And it was, although I was in a really quiet space anyway, but it wasn't, you know, and I could still hear the narrative self all around the edges of it, but I just ignored it. You know,
yeah, like it's out on the, like if you think of that brain model, it's out on the periphery, right? But you're right in the center. Yeah. So it can be going on, but the more you're really cued into the center, like it's not even happening. And as when you really focus into those qualities of stillness, and I find it fascinating that you can actually feel stillness, that you can actually hear silence, that you can actually feel space, right? And so they become objects that lead to objectless awareness.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Karen.
Okay, there we go. I wanted to say that you wrote about in chapter 6, 4 subtle variations of the shift to non-dual awareness. Choiceless attention, infinite spacious awareness. And the 2 I want to talk about is hearing the sound of Om and clear light. I don't really hear Om. It's more of a, like a buzz. Is that what is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, it's like, and Stephen will speak to this too, but I describe it as the hum of the universe. So and if you listen to silence, there's like the subtlest vibration there. The subtlest that permeates everything. And different people will, you know, kind of hear it in different flavors, but that's how it arises in this consciousness here.
Yeah, Kevin, just on that, I know you're going to talk about clear light, but just on that, the Yogananda, when he spoke about sounds, I'll just show you how he represented this. He spoke about the different sounds that people experience, like bumblebee sounds, flute sounds, harp sounds, bell sounds, sea roar, and all sounds. What Kevin's talking about is all sounds. So he's experiencing the all primordial sound combination that Om represents. So the primordial sound that is beyond all sounds. And that, or effectively taken from both angles, it's beyond all sounds and it is all sound. So some of the, you experienced a buzzing. So when the buzzing happens, that's actually an opening of a particular energy center in the body. And that's how Yogananda described it, as like a bumblebee or a buzzing sound. And that you don't necessarily go through these in order, they can each arise, but they're different energy center sounds. And I always thought that was a very, very easeful way of describing some of the things that happened. It's a bit like our own experience, just as Wang was describing about our own experience of how we come to experience awareness, that there are, and as Kevin and I was talking about this process of a river, it's the same with the sound. You come to the sound through a variety of different portals, depending on your predispositions and your personality, and you tend to hear them in different ways. So I've worked with a lot of people over the years, helping them understand and access these sounds, and they definitely come at it from different points. I've got a client I work with at the moment who hears a bell, doesn't necessarily hear a buzz, but hears a bell and hears at different times what Kevin's speaking to, which is that primordial sound. So, just as a simple way of saying that what you're hearing is a real access point for what Kevin's speaking to. And they're very, very beautiful. Yeah. So if that helps a little bit.
Can I ask a quick question about that sound? Does the sound changes when your state of consciousness also change?
Yeah, I think that's fair. It's like talking about singing and music. When we listen to a beautiful soprano, for example, who's singing in a really pure tone, there's no doubt that the sound that we hear and the sound that she shares is very pure based on her understanding of that. So, and it's the same, the sound definitely changes as our consciousness changes. So over the years, I've noticed that internal sound shifted from how it happened when I first accessed it, which was a certain degree or frequency of sound. Over the years, it's shifted. And in fact, I'm working with a lot of different people at the moment who are experiencing lots of shifts in frequency in states. Their perception of what, as Kevin said, you can feel spaciousness, you can hear stillness. Your perception on really subtle levels of these qualities changes over the years. So as your sense of consciousness changes, you tend to be working much more with subtle states of consciousness. And as a result, your perception of subtlety shifts and you become, oh, it sounds different. It makes sense, right? When we listen to a beautiful piece of music in the beginning, somebody plays us a piano concerto and we can just hear all the whole thing, but it sounds amazing. But then as you learn the piano, your perception of all the little spaces in that pattern, the movements and the subtleties and the pianissimo and the forte and all the rest of it, you start to actually literally perceive things that you never even knew existed before. And it's the same with as consciousness becomes more and more subtle, you perceive deeper and more beautiful levels of subtlety.
Thank you.
And then on the clear light, you want?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Okay. Yeah. So as you are resting as awareness and you get familiar and comfortable as that space, that boundless space, it happens that space just feels, or there's a brightness, a luminosity of that space. There's just a natural, you come to experience that that space just has a natural luminosity, a natural brightness that's a quality of it, like the peace that is a quality of it. Or so that luminosity could be like the felt quality of joy of the space or aliveness of the space. So that there's a clear luminosity that's a quality of that awareness. Stephen, you want to add to that?
Yeah. So the clear light is not actually a light, just as Kevin's describing. A lot of people go looking for a light and think they're going to see a light shining at them. And that does happen in jhana states, for example. You'll get bright lights, but they are more signs of what Kevin's talking about. They're signs of the luminosity. There is a point in consciousness as you meditate where your perception of consciousness is so clear and so light. Like Mingyur Rinpoche describes it as a light. No, it's like a lightness of being. So the clear light is talking about such a subtle level of consciousness that your perception, if you can call it that, your awareness at that point is so light and so clear that it's like looking up into a clear sky, which is luminous, right, and bright and vivid, and so your state. So going to Wang's, no thought. There is obviously no thought, because the degree of your consciousness is so clear, vivid, and light that it is called that clear light. It is so vivid, and you'll know, because when you experience it, it literally is like the sky of your mind. There's no other way of describing it. Your mind literally reveals itself to you in its true nature as being absolute clarity, and you recognize it, and there's a recognition of that clarity. So these are, a lot of what you're probably starting to become aware of is that we're talking about quality. We're not talking about objects. We're actually talking about a state of mind that is so clear and vivid that it's called clear light. It's that degree of luminosity, and you literally feel it as that, because you are that. You're not separate from it at that point. Yeah. So you're not looking out and seeing a light. It's actually, you are that clarity.
Yeah, and it's very much, again, a felt sense. It's a felt sense of brightness, aliveness. And visually, there is kind of a brightening of the field, right, Stephen? Right, and it's very much a felt sense of that luminosity. And I will tell you that Mind Monitor has trouble with that.
Yeah. Kevin and I both found that when that luminosity happens, it does
aberrant reading. Yeah.
most of the ones where we've tested have a lot of trouble reading luminous states. Yeah, so that as Kevin said, it literally brightens. It's like without meaning an object of the sun, but it's like the sun rises in your mind. It's that degree of luminosity. It's like, if you imagine the most beautiful sunset magnified many times. It's like that degree. It's so bright and it's so luminous that, some people describe it as a full moon rising, or that degree of subtlety, or that degree of luminosity when you're looking and it's so bright. And it's not that there is an object. That's what I'm trying to get at.
You just are that. Yeah.
I kind of have confusion about limiters versus this luminous light that you're talking about, because many times I see very straight, really bright white circle. I mean, it's very clear and it's brighter than bright, versus what you guys are describing. In my mind, I have few states where it's just kind of bright, but it's kind of like cloudy, not like super duper clear, but it is luminous all over. So is that what you guys are talking about? Because I kind of get confused with those two kind of states,
so the
or
first
whatever objects or whatever
you're describing is a nimitta. It's an object that you're absorbed into, right? It's so, and so in jhana meditation, there's this arising of light or a felt sense, or for some people it's like a purplish hue, or like you described, a white light. And that's something that you can allow yourself, your attention, to be drawn into that and be absorbed in it as a portal to this awareness itself, which is not an object, not something you're focused on. It's just a quality of the infinite field itself. Yeah.
So I think, and then Wang, I think you were asking, you get confused between the the clouded sense of luminosity and the nimitta, those two. Yeah. So when there is a perception of something, that's still just that. There is still a perception of, so there is I know what some of those states, over the years, I know those states where if it's so bright, but there's still a subject, there's still this really subtle awareness of something as an object. So there's a subtle awareness of the luminous nature of whatever arises with a sort of a cloudiness. So that's still a really subtle subject object, even though it's a very, very deep and absorbed state. So when that drops out completely, because there's no self-reference point. In fact, it might be at that point quite difficult to remember that you've actually had that experience until you and then it kind of pops back into your mind as a referential somehow memory that's lodged in there. But it's not like you're sitting there and you're looking at a luminous state as it were. That is part of the process, but that's still a subject object point. So if you find yourself in that and you kind of, that's certainly part of the jhana process. It's not when you find yourself literally pulled in and then the subject object reference points dissolve. At that point, there is just knowingness, and there is a knowingness or beingness, and there's no longer that sense of, there's no longer the sense of that being an object any longer. It's hard to describe, right? I mean, all of us stumble on the words of describing that because you're in a state that is beyond concept. So that's why it sounds such a conundrum to say, oh, well, it's so difficult to put into words, but it really is, because that state is so difficult to put into words.
Well, and our language is subject-object language. That is our language. So when you are transcending the subject-object distinction, by definition, there is no language for that. But there's, as we keep saying, a felt sense. There's a knowing.